Great to see all of you from across the globe. And for those of you who don't know me, I know many of you, but for those of you who don't know me, my name is Theo Spanos Dunphy, and I'm the president and executive director of Global Citizen Circle. For 50 years, can't believe it, our organization is celebrating our 50th anniversary. We have been gathering together people of diverse backgrounds, ages, ethnicities, religions, and opinions to talk with and listen to one another. And in doing that, to stimulate constructive change around issues of pressing concern locally, nationally, and globally. Pre-pandemic, these conversations happened in person in New Hampshire, in Boston, in Washington, D.C., in Atlanta, and in South Africa, Northern Ireland, Israel, and Cuba. And while the pandemic was nothing that we would have anticipated, nor would we have wished for, it did bring us an unexpected silver lining. Connecting on Zoom regularly with more people throughout the world has brought us closer during these trying times. A shared sense of purpose in championing those working for a more peaceful and just world has shown us how important it is to listen and learn from one another with open hearts and minds. More than ever, we see that there's a need for this kind of connection. And I'm so pleased to welcome all of you to the circle. And I just want to tell you how the idea for this circle came about. It was prompted by an unexpected but wonderful opportunity that we had to meet Oleksandra Matviichuk last spring in Boston at the home of Eric Sanunis, who I think may be here today, and who met Oleksandra when he went to Ukraine to begin filming a documentary. And as things often happen with Global Citizen Circle, Eric and Oleksandra had met with a past circle discussion leader, Ocharo Otanu, who then recommended that Oleksandra meet the people from Global Citizen Circle. And here we are today, less than 7 degrees of separation. And that's the great thing about connecting and making lasting friendships over a 50-year time span. Similarly, our moderator, Miki Jacevik, was introduced to us by our longtime advisor and friend, Judith Thompson, who's also here today. I had often heard Judith sing the praises of her friend Miki, and to finally meet him is to love him. His own personal story of living through the Bosnian War as a young man and his professional career of working globally to ensure that women are always at the peace and reconciliation table makes him the ideal person to facilitate this most timely and urgent conversation with Oleksandra. So I don't want to take up more time with long introductions of either of these distinguished guests, as you can read their bios, and I really encourage you to do that if you haven't already. They're in the participants list that we distributed with the Zoom reminders. But I want to give a warm welcome to Oleksandra and Miki. And I will invite Miki in one moment to take over the virtual mic to get us started. But before I do, I want to also say to all of you that we really encourage interaction during and even after our program. And if you have a question or a comment, please, at any time during the program, please just type it into the chat. And once we've heard from our discussion leader, Miki will call on you to unmute yourself, say your name and where you're from, and ask your question. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to you, Miki.
Oh, thank you, Theo. Such a lovely introduction, though you did a few sentences more than we planned, but thank you. So heartfelt. So Haroshi Dan to my fellow Slavs on the call, and assalamu alaikum, and many, many greetings. So my name is Miki Jacevik, indeed, from Bosnia, but now indeed a global citizen. So let me start by congratulating you on your 50th anniversary, and obviously the reason for many things in my life, including literally my wife and my children, is Judith Thompson. So special regards to that leader. And so I just want to frame this, obviously, while the focus is rightly on Oleksandra's plight in Ukraine, I do not want to miss the people of Palestine, people of Sudan, people of many, many places where the similar quest for justice continues. And so with that, I do want to turn to Oleksandra. And as it happens, I started this 1993 at the World Human Rights Conference, when my first interaction was actually with friends who were fighting to get justice, particularly for the victims, female victims, women victims of rape and other crimes. So like you, I dreamt of doing something else, I know you wanted to be a theater director. So how did you end up here, and what does the quest look like for you right now?
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to be in this very warm, friendly circle. I'm a human rights lawyer, but you're totally right. When I was a child, I thought that I will go to do art, and I probably will become a theater director, because I had passion to theater and to literature. And probably if I was born in Switzerland, this will happen. But I was born in Ukraine, in not easy time for my country. And in school, I got acquaintance with Soviet dissidents. And one of them, a famous philosopher, writer, and former political prisoner of Soviet Gulag, Yevhen Sverstyuk, he started to take care about me. And he ingrained me in the circle of Soviet dissidents in Ukraine. And finally, I appeared with the people from my history books, with the people who provided me a very sincere example that you can tell what you think and you can do what you tell, who had the courage to fight against the whole totalitarian Soviet machine, who were imprisoned, who were subjected to psychological forcible treatment. Part of their colleagues were killed. All their careers were ruined, families were separated, but they continued their fight for freedom and for human dignity. And it was a very bright example that even when you have no other tools but just your own words and your own position, you have to use your own words and your own position for the right purpose. And this is so little. So I was so inspiring by this example and this people that I decided myself to study law and to fight for freedom and for justice. But who knows, probably not sooner but later, I can realize my child dream and do something in theater as well.
Oh, I'm sure you will. But so thanks for that inspiring start. And yet to move us a little bit more closer to today, this quest for justice that, I mean, thank God your work has been recognized with the Nobel Peace Prize. And yet you and I also know countless activists, human rights lawyers, particularly women and youth leaders. So what I wanted to go directly to a little bit more, because I know you speak of symbolic justice. And so I mentioned my beloved leader called my wife's spouse, Eva Morales from Guatemala, who lost almost 30 family members 40 years ago. And then 30 years ago, my war in the former Yugoslavia started. And she and I often have this argument where, because of such plight and realities of her story, she often says there is no justice, because the reality is that most of those perpetrators of that civil war, which, by the way, for my American friends, you might recall, was very much supported by the CIA and the right-wing US governments, never really were held to justice. And yet I go to my war, and this reality of many of these people, the perpetrators, like I'm from the mixed family, like many Ukrainians are, you have cousins who were on the other side. So what is justice for you? How does it look like? How does it feel like? What are you fighting for?
Thank you for this important question. It's not easy to answer, and that is why I will start with some story. This is a story of famous photo. You can Google it very easily in the internet. Its photo was made not in Ukraine, but 30 years ago during the Balkans War. And on this photo, you can see the Serbian military who kicked the elder woman laying on the ground. Near this elder woman, also two men in civilian clothes are laying, and there is a pool of blood near all these three people. And when you look to this photo, you have an impression that probably all these three civilians are killed, and the Serbian military just kicked their dead bodies. 1 year and a half, a group of international journalists decided to discover this story of this photo. And they made their own investigation only with using open data sources. And they revealed the Serbian military, identified him. They revealed that the Serbian military has never been punished, that he made a successful career as a DJ, and he still performs in festivals and concerts. What I want to tell with this example, now we as a humankind have a digital instrument which provides us an opportunity to restore what happened, to collect evidence, to document war crimes, to identify perpetrators, which we can't even dream 30 years ago. That when you now hear that it's sad, but unfortunately, we can't provide justice for hundreds of thousands of victims of the war. It's not true. I challenge this thesis. Theoretically, it's possible. Now, as a humankind, we're equipped with technologies which provide us opportunity to provide justice to all victims of the war. We have to change our way of thinking. We have to put ambitious goals, and we have to create appropriate legal infrastructure. And this is our work in Ukraine. And I do hope that we will succeed, because it's important not just for Ukrainians. It can become a first positive precedent to people who suffered from autocrats and wars in other countries or in different parts of the globe.
Oh, that is so important, Oleksandra. And thank you for giving this perspective of hope and resilience, because often in this quest for justice, there is this reality. And I do want to ask you about holding Putin and key perpetrators accountable. So I do want to get there next. But I do want to stay with this theme of, because in my experience, and due to this, and I often say, and I know you say this as well, we never wish these kind of wars to happen to anybody, but when they happen, you just have to put your foot in front of the other and be strong and try to bring this level of justice. And for me, what do you think about this? For me, everything you do is, as long as the victims tell their story, as long as somebody can listen and validate, because sometimes, I remember coming here 30 years ago and people asking, well, how is it possible neighbors kill each other? You feel like a crazy person. Like ordinary people start doing extraordinary things. And yet for me, as long as a mother of Srebrenica, which is a village in my country where genocide happened, as long as somebody can tell her they picked him up at 2 a.m., they took him to this location, he was shot, here are his remains, or we are looking for his remains. So can you speak more about that perspective of, I want to attend to the victims? While again, we also, next I want to hear about accountability, but that's what you were talking about, documentation and victim stories.
I can understand the feeling of people who can't believe that neighbors can do such horrible things, because now we live in horror.
Yeah.
And as a human rights lawyer, I have no legal tools how to stop it.
Yeah.
Because Russian troops, they deliberately shell in residential buildings, schools, churches, hospitals, and museums. They attack in evacuation corridors. They torturing people in filtration camps. They forcibly take in Ukrainian children to Russia. They ban Ukrainian language and culture.
Yeah.
They are abducting, robbing, killing, and raping civilians in the occupied territories. and entire UN architecture of peace
Yeah.
and security can't stop it. And when you live in this horror, having these new technologies, when the rockets, business rockets are going to Mars for touristic journey, it's very difficult to compare. You start to ask yourself how it can happen in 21st century, such barbarian methods, such denial of human dignity,
Yeah.
how one human beings can do such things to another human beings. But unfortunately, it happens, and not just in Ukraine. Unfortunately, it happened in Iran, in Sudan, in Nicaragua, in Afghanistan, and we can continue the places and countries where the horror became a part of daily life of people. And this is our common responsibility.
Right.
And that is why I do believe that one of the roots of this horror is impunity. And I try to ruin this basis for this behavior, because all this hell, which we now have in Ukraine, is the result of total impunity, which Russia enjoyed for decades. Russian troops committing horrible war crimes in Chechnya, in Moldova, in Georgia, in Mali, in Syria, in Libya, in other countries of the world. They have never been punished. They believe they can do whatever they want. And that is why only for 2 years of large-scale war, we, together with our partners, jointly documented more than 64,000 episodes of war crimes. And because people are not numbers, I would like to tell you one story. And this is a story which I not document myself because I can't work with children. Frankly speaking, it's too hard for me. So this is a story which was documented by my colleague. And this is a story of 10-year-old boy, Ilya Matvienko from Mariupol. When Russians tried to siege the city, they didn't allow International Committee of Red Cross to evacuate civilians from there. And that is why Ilya and his mother, like many others people in Mariupol for the time, they just hiding in the basement of their residential buildings from Russian shelling. They melted snow to have a water, and they made a fire to cook at least some food. But when supplies ran out, they have to go out, and suddenly they appeared in the center of Russian shelling. Ilya's mother was hit in her head, and the boy's legs was torn. And with the last strength, his mother took her son to the friend apartment. There was no medical assistance. Prior to this, Russians deliberately destroy maternity hospital and the whole medical infrastructure in Mariupol. And that is why in this friend apartment, they just laying on the couch and hugging each other. And they lying like this for several hours. And this 10-year-old boy told to my colleague that her mother died and got cold and frozen just in his hugging. When you hear such story, regardless who they are, what your nationality, what your ethnicity, what your religion, what your color of skin, what your political views, what your ideology, nothing matter, because it's very understandable for each people in the world what the horror is going on. And it's also understandable that people are not numbers. And we must return people their names. And I'm sorry for being emotional, but this is our job.
Oh, thank you. And first, never, never apologize. You are not emotional, you are strong. And those tears are honoring, because what you just described put me back 30 years ago in my basement when my family and my neighbors were exactly the same story. And it's happening everywhere. And so your strength is to combine that emotion and passion, because as you say, and this should be the theme, people are not numbers. And every name of every victim, you are honoring his mother and giving him strength. So I just want to validate his courage and yours and your team's ability to document. So so yes, you moved me now and put a lot of thoughts in my head, but thank you. And so I do want to go back to the theme, and I know again you mentioned, and I so strongly believe, is breaking the cycle of violence, breaking the cycle of evil. And that only happens through that element of somebody has to acknowledge, number one, that what's happening is just not okay, that human beings are losing their life for no reason, right? So that element of, and I often sort of call this the AAA battery of this movement. The first one is acknowledgement, right? That this is just wrong. What you just described, I mean, my heart is breaking. But the second element is action. Like we need to do something about it. And you are such a great example and inspiration to all of us. And then the third one, which is what I want to get to, maybe not so much Putin and those, but I've seen in my story, so obviously Ukraine is happening right now, but 30 years later in Bosnia, I was just working. We have a wonderful, and I invite everybody to come to my hometown of Sarajevo, and we have something called Child Memories Museum, where great young people who were children during the war, now they're in their 40s, 50s, they told their stories and their artifacts and sort of experiences like Ilya has had. And 2 weeks ago, for the first time, a school from Serbia came. And I mean, I'm going to cry now from the power of this reconciliation, which is symbolic act of apology. So what do you think would look like getting that element of acknowledgement, action, and apology for children like Ilya to be whole again?
It's a great question. And I think that we have to find a complex answer to this complex question, because I worked with people affected by this war directly. And I know that people who survived from the hell, they need to restore not just their broken lives, broken health, broken families, broken vision of the future. They need to restore their broken belief
Yep.
that justice is possible, even though delay in time.
Absolutely.
And when you go deeper, you suddenly understand that people see justice very differently. For some people, justice means to see their perpetrators behind the bars. For another people, justice means to get compensations because they lost everything, and without compensation, they feel unsatisfied. For some people, justice means just to know truth.
Yes.
What happened with their beloved ones? Where their grave? For another people, justice means just a possibility to be heard and to get public recognition that something which happened with them and their families are not just immoral, but illegal. And that is why our job is so complicated. We have to build a comprehensive justice strategy with different elements, with different institutions, and to reach all these needs, because this is different phases of the one phenomena, what justice is about. And this is not easy, especially when you're dealing with a country which publicly ignore all international norms or decisions of international organizations. But while I refer to this story of a 10-year-old boy, Ilya, that if he found the courage to tell this story to my colleague, we as adults have no excuse to stop fighting for justice.
So true. And again, like I'm glad we are recording this because I want to listen to it again. Like every sentence blows my mind. But so I really want to emphasize these various levels you're talking about. And often, so in many circles, particularly legally, And then, what we can get to see, there's such an emphasis on the high level accountability on, this, everybody says, well, Putin, he just got reelected and he's never going to go to jail. And similarly, in my country, those political leaders. But I always say justice, even for one victim, if his or her story is told and they feel validated. And I really want to just stress and give you further courage, because again, for 30 years, I have seen many a mother of Bosnian children who were killed become whole again because they feel recognized, they feel valued, they feel the life of her child was not in vain because somebody, and that's what we do often, we just go visit them on March 8th, International Women's Day or something. Symbolic justice is so important. So how do you spread that in Ukraine in the middle of war beyond just documenting?
The main problem is that, as you rightly mentioned, we are in the middle of the war, which means that we have not just to document war crimes. We are doing our best to stop these war crimes. And this is a very difficult question to answer because, unfortunately, international laws instrument are not working. As I mentioned before, Russia ignored it. In 2022, UN Court of Justice made the intermediate decision and obliged Russian troops to withdraw from Ukraine. And Russia ignored even the decision of UN Court of Justice.
Yeah.
So what we can use as a lawyers to stop this horror, they really do whatever they want.
Yeah.
I interviewed hundreds of people who survived Russian captivity because for the first years of the war, our main focus was practice of illegal detention, sexual violence, torture, and killing civilians in the occupied territories. They told me such horrible stories that if I may, if I could, I would like to forget it, but
Yeah.
unfortunately I can't, because they told me how they were beaten, raped, smashed into wooden boxes, fingers were cut, nails were torn away, nails were drilled, how they were compelled to write something with their own blood. One woman told me how her eye was dug out with a spoon.
Mm.
And I interviewed hundreds of people, but I remember her name. It's very difficult stories and it's very difficult reality because
Right.
there is no justification for such Russian action. There is no legitimate purpose in doing this. There is no military necessity.
Yeah.
When someone asks me why Russians do such horrible thing, I can only answer because they could. So our task is not just to document and to war crimes and to establish a comprehensive justice mechanism on international level, on national level, to use the experience of these other people in the world. For example, I know personally the founder of this children museum, and they did fantastic work. They came to Ukraine several times and they make exhibition about Ukrainian children in the
Yes.
war. So it's important, but urgent thing for us to stop Russian army, because how as long as they can go further means that we will face with hundreds and hundreds of requests for help every day from occupied territories and from deep rears.
So such powerful component. Yes, both documenting, as you're saying, listening, but so going to the big picture. So I do want to sort of hear on as a lawyer on this international level, because as some people might know, the reality is we do have International Criminal Court, which nominally was created out of the experiences of Rwanda and former Yugoslavia, where we did prosecute. And people often ask me, what did these courts do? They only gotten a few people. But I can tell from my friends to Rwanda, and for me, knowing that Slobodan Milosevic, who was the president of Serbia at the time, and by the way, great friend of Putin. You know, that those autocrats have been together for decades, right? This is not new. So I'm glad there is that connection. But, you know, he got prosecuted. He died in jail, and people say, well, there was no justice served. But for some of us, the reality that he was captured and put in jail symbolically said what he did as a leader of a country, you know, and people say, well, they never know. So what do you think is now the possibility with this, even if it's a delayed justice on the international level, to really hold Putin accountable? Not just, as you said, for Ukraine. I see some people commenting Mali, but their warmongering goes back 30 years. So what should we do as international community to really support some kind of that top level accountability?
Let me return to your example, because I think it's very important one. Because we have this example when Milosevic were transferred to The Hague, we can clearly see that history of humankind prove us authoritarian regimes collapse, and their leaders who see themselves untouchable. And Milosevic also saw himself untouchable, appeared under the court. And this is very, not just historical, but very important message for future. And this message provides us hope. And now we face with accountability gap, which I want to describe you, because when we mentioned Yugoslavia Tribunal, Rwanda Tribunal, court in Sierra Leone and others, I will simplify, but this is a court where leaders and their surroundings were tried because they killed people in uncivilized way. What do I mean? International humanitarian law is not prohibited wars. International humanitarian law established rules how you have to behave during the wars. But wars is horrible. We have to prohibit wars as such. And it's a common logic. If we want to prevent wars in the future, we have to punish the state and their leaders, not just for that, that they kill someone not appropriate to the rules, but because they started this war.
Exactly.
And for the whole history of humankind, we have only one such a precedent. Only one such a precedent. In past century, it was Nuremberg trial, where Nazi war criminals were tried, but only after Nazi regime had collapsed. So now we had a historical challenge because there is no international court who can prosecute Putin and his surrounding for that fact that he started this war, for the crime of aggression. Even International Criminal Court has no such jurisdiction, unfortunately. That is why we have to fill this gap of accountability and to create a special tribunal on aggression. So it's one ambitious task. And second, politicians still look to the world through the lens of the Nuremberg trials. And they told us, let's wait when the war will end.
Over.
And we say, for what? We live in new century. Justice cannot wait. There is no necessity to put justice into dependence when and how war will end. If someone commit crime of aggression, this someone has to be punished, regardless of the result of the war. This is a new logic which we have to ingrain in 21st century if we want to prohibit and prevent wars in the future. And that is why there is a second level of ambitions. We have to convince to create such special tribunal now, during the war.
Yeah. As Nancy says, justice cannot wait. So I want to turn to my final topic. And as I'm saying that, I encourage friends to start thinking about your own questions and the order. So what inspires me daily, where I found as a 20-year-old, when I looked at that horror of Sarajevo, which is now Mariupol and Kharkov and all your cities, is this element of women's leadership, women's courage. Like you yourself exemplify that. I see my sister Amra Panjo from Bosnia, who continues to inspire me, my beloved freshens from Liberia, so many of the women who never get recognized. They're not equipped. We view this war, even today, if you turn BBC, there's just pictures of the soldiers, either Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers. But I think of my mother. She sustained life in that war because there's nothing really you can do. As you're saying, that the shells come down, what can people do? But like Ilya's mother saved his life. And so I just want to recognize you as a young woman inspiring us all. But can you speak a little bit more about the women's strength to sort of pick up the pieces in the middle of all this chaos?
It's a very important question, and I would like to touch in two dimensions. First, I would tell you that I know a lot of fantastic women in different fields of society. Women are fighting in Ukraine armed forces.
Yes.
It's not obligatory for women in Ukraine. Do you know that 63,000 of women joined Ukraine armed forces to defend our freedom, democracy, and human dignity? Among them, my friend Andriana Susak. She is an extremely brave person. She left her 6-year-old son and joined Ukraine armed forces when large-scale invasion started because she told, I have to fight for my son peaceful future. I don't want my son to fight. As a mother, I bring this responsibility to my own shoulders. She was among those Ukrainian defenders who liberated Kharkiv region in September 2022. He took part in a battle for Kherson in December 2022, and she was blown up in a mine.
Mm.
It's a story with a good ending, I promise you, because it was a very hard several days when doctors are struggling for her life, but she survived. Now she's going from a long period of rehabilitation, and she planned to return to her service. Because she told, we have no right to be tired. If we stop fighting, there will be no more us. And what I want to tell with this example, because Ukrainian women, they take political decisions, they coordinate civil initiative, they document war crimes, they're fighting with arms in their hands for their freedom, for their children. This is also a very unique opportunity to show the difference between Russia and Ukraine. In Ukraine, as well in other democracies, women can perform any role they want, and that is why we have 63,000 women in Ukraine armed forces. But in Russia, women can play only assigned roles for them in family and society. And this is a basis for autocrats' order, because established relations between people in society always reflect the society's idea what government can do toward their own people. That is why in Norway, men and women have equal rights. In Afghanistan, women are prohibited to study in university. In Russia, domestic violence is decriminalized because once again, it's always just a projection how government behave toward their own people in this country. And that is why Ukrainian women now in the far front of this battle for freedom and democracy. Bravery has no gender.
Yes.
And Ukrainian women know that in this war, we are fighting also for our daughter. For our daughters, that our daughters will have never find themselves in situation that they have to prove someone, that they are all human beings, that they have rights and freedom.
Amazing. I wish we had some writers on the call because there's a book here to be written, just a transcription here. But so speaking of Ukrainian daughters, I want to open our circle up, and I want to invite another Oleksandra Godina, who was in the previous circle on youth resilience. So Sasha, if you want to say a few words or if you have a question for Oleksandra, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Yes. First, I wanted to say thank you to Oleksandra. Like I'm super emotional right now, and I just wanted to thank you for everything you just said. Thank you for speaking up for all of Ukraine, for us, for everyone. Literally, like thank you so much for speaking your mind and spreading awareness and sharing everything that's going on in our country with the world. Like it means everything. Yeah, and for the question, so, well, you received the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Peace Prize, which is, well, probably the highest accolade you could even receive for fighting for human rights. But a lot of people I know, I've met some on the internet, I've met some in real life, view peace between they have a perception of peace which in their minds would mean the Ukraine's surrender or Ukraine giving up a part of its territories, which is obviously, well, not what Ukrainians view as peace. So what would you say to those people, and how do you view peace in our context?
Thank you for this question. It's a general trend. People want to simplify the things, and they don't know this experience. And I wish nobody to get through this experience, because war is probably the worst things which can happen in the human life. But if we face with some complex challenge, we have no right to simplify things. What do I mean? If you have a runny nose, like me right now, you can treat your disease with a jump. At least it not harm the body. But if you have cancer, the delay of actual therapy and price of such simple solution will be very high. So we can't afford ourselves simple solutions. So let's provide Russia part of Ukrainian territories in order to satisfy their imperialist appetites. Because this not solution at all. First, it's wrong. Because peace is something which we are fighting for in this war. People in Ukraine want peace much more than anyone else, because it's us dying. But peace doesn't come when country which was invaded stop fighting. That's not peace. That's occupation. And occupation, it's not a way how to decrease human suffering. Occupation is just another form of the war. I know what I'm talking about because I am documenting war crimes for 10 years. And I know that people who live in occupation, they live in gray zone without any possibility to protect their rights, their freedoms, their property, their lives, and their beloved ones. Occupation is not just changing one state flag to another. Occupation means enforced disappearances, rape, torture, denial of your identity, forcible adoption of your own children, filtration camps, and mass graves. This is occupation. So we have no moral rights to leave people alone for torture and death under Russian occupation. It's not human to do like this. It's our relatives, it's our neighbors, it's our friends, it's our people. We can't leave them alone without any protection, because someone tell us, let's satisfy Russia imperialist appetites. And also because Russia will not stop. Let me remind you that this war started not in February 2022. Yeah, exactly. This war started in February 2014 when Russia occupied Crimea and part of Lugansk and Donetsk regions, and Ukraine have zero chance to return them. How Russia uses 8 years? Russia built a powerful military base in Crimea. Russia trained their troops. Russia find a way how for future to bypass the possible sanctions. They retreat, they regroup, and they start large-scale war. This is a reality. I can understand that some people don't want to accept it. But if we will not look and understand reality, we will be killed. We can't afford such behavior in the war.
Oh, thank you. Thank you both, Oleksandras, for this. And I just want to so strengthen your argument, because 30 years later, even though Milosevic was ended up in jail and stuff like that, but through Russian influence in the Balkans, the war never stopped. And so you're absolutely right. It's not right, but it's not the solution either. I think, and this is my message to our American friends, many of whom obviously will have the opportunity to choose this November, and the choice is stark between voices and forces of authoritarian and expansion, because today more people live under people like Putin than live in the democracy that both Oleksandras are fighting for. So thank you both so much. I want to shift us over to Africa. And so I want to start, I saw my sister Hannah first, because I saw your hand first, and then Emmanuel, you can be next. But assalamu alaikum, Hannah, and please go ahead.
Wa alaikum assalam, Brother Miki. Thank you so much for the opportunity to. First, I'd like to say a few things, and I have a question for Oleksandra. So, the Israeli genocide on Gaza killed more than 30,914 people, more than 14,000 children, more than 9,220 women, more than 7,000 people are missing, more than 73,934 people are injured in only 165 days. This is the record from yesterday. Over 70% of those killed by Israel are children. It is the most well-documented genocide ever recorded in the human history. UE Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell calls Gaza the world's largest open-air graveyard, and graveyard for the principles of humanitarian law. When he addressed the UN Security Council a week ago, he also said the humanitarian crisis is man-made, Israeli-made. And when he looked for alternative ways to providing support by sea, by air, we have to, it's his word, we have to remind ourselves that we have to do it because the natural way of providing support were blocked. Starvation is being used as a war weapon. And when this is his word, these are his words, we condemn this happening in Ukraine, we have to use the same words for what is happening in Gaza for more than 75 years. So my question to you, Ms. Oleksandra, how have you not mentioned it? How have you not mentioned my brothers and sisters in Palestine suffering for more than 75 years? Thank you very much for letting me.
Thank you very much for this question. I also don't mention the suffering of people in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, in Sudan, in Nicaragua, and other countries only because we are focused on my job in Ukraine, and I work on human rights crimes and documentation in Ukraine. But as a human rights defender, I strongly believe that if we want to fight for justice, we have to fight for justice globally. And all these horrible things which happen in Ukraine, in Middle East, in Iran, in Afghanistan, in Nicaragua, in other countries, it's result of total collapse of international system of peace and security. They are not working anymore, this UN's architecture of peace and security. The Security Council is paralyzed, and they not protect people against autocrats. They not protect people against wars. It means that we faced a period of turbulence, and now such fires like wars will be appeared more and more often in different regions of our planet, because the whole international system is faulty and sparks everywhere. And we have two strategy how to deal with it. We can compete with each other for attention to the pain of people in one or another countries, and I think it's a bad strategy. Or we have to unite our efforts and to push to reform this international system, to push for accountability mechanism, to establish a new international platform, and which is based on solidarity and rule of law, and to make a positive precedent in different countries how to fight for justice. Let me describe it with one concrete example, not from Ukrainians, but from Syrian human rights defenders. You know that war in Syria is still going on, and they're not in the news anymore. People are dying, people are torturing, people are subjected to sexual violence and to horror treatment, and nobody speaks about it. And it's going on for years and years, and it's real horror. When large-scale war started, I got a letter from Syrian human rights defenders. Are you interested in what they tell me? They told me, we are with you. We know what the war is about. We know your pain. We understand your pain. We understand your suffering. Please tell us, what do you need to be successful in your fight for justice? Because your fight, it's our fight. And this is a great example of solidarity. And this is, I think, how we have to behave. Because when we speak about first strategy, I heard that some people can tell, we failed with our attempt for justice in our country. So why we have to support your fight? Because I think it's a wrong logic. We have so much failures with justice around the world that we need a positive precedent, because the positive precedent of establishing justice and law can encourage millions and millions of people in different parts of the world to continue their fight. And that is why I believe in unity. I believe in synergy. And once again, I will repeat, if we fight for justice, we have to fight for justice globally, and we have to support each other.
Thank you, Oleksandra, and Hannah. Thank you also for that perspective. And just to be clear, I did start with acknowledging Palestine #1, Sudan as well, but the focus is obviously Ukraine. Again, thank you, and I want to point. Catherine has mentioned a lot in the comments we can pay attention to in terms of American accountability, or if I could say also specifically American government. But I do also want to honor Emmanuel, who also is from another part of Africa where this plight does also continue. So Emmanuel, please.
All right, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask the question. I just want to give you guys a little background of my very self. I was born a few years to the brutal war that we suffered, just like you mentioned in your when you were answering one of your questions, that Sierra Leone suffered a similar fate, and we had the special court for Sierra Leone that was formed. I am always a very critical person when it comes to international law. I am a human rights lawyer. I've done international law, but I'm very critical, especially when it comes to the work of the ICC. Like you rightly mentioned, the Security Council is almost like a muted council. And from what I have seen in the past, you know, in 2019, I published an article about the ICC. To me, I just felt like then that the ICC was more for Africans and other developing countries, but not for the developed countries. So I'm very critical about the court. That's why I sent that question earlier. So with me, my question here is very simple. What we experienced in Sierra Leone after the special court for Sierra Leone, a lot of people felt like the court did not really represent Sierra Leoneans. It represented other opinions. But my question here now is, if you are seeing that, in your own opinion as a human rights lawyer, you believe that really the Security Council is almost crippled, because most of the members of the Security Council are not even members of the Rome Statute that created the ICC. What do you think is the role of the ICC in all what Putin is currently doing? Are we saying that because international law has failed us, people like dictators like Putin is going to go scot-free? Have we opened the doors to impunity or for dictators like Vladimir Putin?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your question. I will try to answer it in tackling 2 points. First, I will start with the work of International Criminal Court. It's very important for Ukraine. We know that International Criminal Court will limit its investigation only to several selected cases. Ukrainian Office of General Prosecutors officially registered more than 122,000 criminal proceedings. And we are aware that International Criminal Court will cover only probably 1% of all these cases.
Right.
So the main burden of responsibility will still be on national system. But why International Criminal Court is important? Because they say they send a right signal to the world. Because still in a lot of countries, politicians are afraid to say that Russia is aggressor. They're afraid to say that Russia occupied Ukraine. They call this Ukrainian crisis, Ukrainian war, and try to avoid to say to call the things what they are, to call a spade a spade. And International Criminal Court, when they issued arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin and his child commissioner Maria Lvova-Belova for the illegal deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia, they sent a message that we don't care that you are current head of a big state. We don't care that your state is a permanent member of Security Council. We don't care that you have nuclear weapon. We don't care that you are 11th economy in the world. If you're committing war crimes, you will be punished. And this is a world which I want to live. This is the right message. And this message will have long-term and short-term result. In long-term result, we just previously told with moderator that authoritarian regime collapse and their leaders who seem themselves untouchable appeared under the court. And now this case have no statute of limitation. They will go in until Putin death. And I do believe that Russian Empire will collapse sooner or later because it's inevitable, like Soviet Union collapsed before it. But it's also important in short-term result because we can say, okay, but a lot of victims probably will live less than Putin. But it's important even from short-term perspective because still so many politicians, businessmen who don't care about freedom, who don't care about justice, they want to return to business as usual with Russia. And now when they shake in Putin's hand, they have to be aware that they're shaking hands with the officially recognized as the most bigger child kidnapper in the world by this arrest warrant of International Criminal Court. And honest people can't afford such behavior. If you are cynical people, probably you can, but if you are honest, you can't. And this is a very important short result. But because you told that you are also a human rights lawyer, I would like also to expand your question and use this opportunity to share my thoughts and probably hear your and other colleagues' thoughts, what the problem is about. The problem of current architecture of peace and security is because this UN system was established in past century by victorious states who won the Second World War. And these victorious states provide for themselves irrational indulgences, like this veto power. And now we're in surrealistic situation when Security Council, which was established to prevent wars or to punish states who start such a wars, have paralyzed because of veto power of one member state of Security Council who has started aggressive war. It's surrealism, it's absurd. The whole architecture is wrong because this architecture is based on hierarchy of domination. There is some group of countries who can decide the whole world destiny. It's not right. We have to start a cardinal reform of this system. And there are a lot of other questions which I can't answer because even when we return to General Assembly of UN, how many countries who are presented there don't represent their people, but just corrupt elite who took power in this country? Like Syria. They still have a vote, but they not represent Syrian people. They're dictator. So there are a lot of legal questions how to build this system in proper way in 21st century. But I do believe that we have to start such conversation because if we will not, the whole system will collapse. It's going on before our eyes. So I know that our time is limited, but if you and other colleagues will have some thoughts, I will be glad to continue this conversation because it's not just Ukrainian problem. It's not just Iranian problem. It's our global problem.
Oh, thank you both so much. And it's both, I mean, I want to acknowledge your point, Emmanuel, from the original ICC. And, you know, often my colleagues and friends in Africa would say, is this just court for African people, African leaders? And yet my sister Precious here is from Liberia. And when Charles Taylor was indicted, I do know how many Liberians gathered. There's that great movie about, again, how Liberians changed that. And it's called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. Like literally, this is devil, this is evil. This is what Oleksandra and you are talking about, is really that evil unpunished continues. And that's so true, Emmanuel, what you're saying. But I also really want to strengthen your argument, Oleksandra, of how do we democratize this whole system of it is just not right. And I really want to strengthen, and Catherine has written quite a few messages about American accountability. I really cannot say enough about, you know, I came to this country as a refugee. I saw this transition. I'm sorry, I might go a little bit too political for the circle, but the changes I'm seeing in this country in terms of the onslaught of authoritarian tendencies, where everybody that is different, either Muslim, Black, Latino, that's how it starts, right? It starts in the ordinary political discourse in which evil is allowed to continue. And so I do want to say, and again, this is not about Bosnia, Sierra Leone, Oleksandra, Ukraine, as you say, this is much bigger. But the bigger countries have bigger responsibility. And the US remains the biggest democracy, at least on paper. So I do want to call on everybody here to understand we all have a role to play. We all have a responsibility to try to make it more just and more democratic. So Emmanuel, very quickly back to you before we start wrapping up, because I do know Oleksandra has to go get another award or something right at time.
Yeah, Alexandra, I really appreciate your presentation. I really want us to really connect on the further level because I still have a lot of questions that I would like us to talk about. Like I am doing a lot of women's rights advocacy across the world. I usually am working more in the African International Court. I'm usually in the African Court of Human Rights. I'm usually in the ECOWAS Court of Justice. I am not one of the best people in my country because I'm just a social critic. And I have refused to rest and I have refused to just adhere to all forms of human rights violations. So I'll definitely try to reach out to you because there are so many issues in international law and human rights in particular that I think we need to discuss further. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I do love, I'm going to quote Marisa here, and I don't know if you want to, Marisa, yourself say the wonderful things you were saying in terms of the strength. So Marisa, do you want to say this great thing or anything else you might want to mention?
Yes. Yeah, this is really interesting. Like this opened up my eyes and it's so cool to meet everybody, Europe and Asia, Africa. Hi. But my name is Marisa, but my real name is Iorghe Luminița, and I was born in Romania. And I was put in the orphanage because back then gypsies faced a lot of persecution, slavery, racism, and still today, which is like really shameful because it's 21st century and we're putting people in boxes and this stuff has to stop. We need to love one another. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, where you come from, your accent, your name. We're all human beings. We're all trying to live. We all have problems. You know, we're all in the same boat and we just need to stop putting labels, you know. But it's just, this was a really an awesome meeting and I felt like I learned a lot and this just touched home for me because I was born with nothing, you know, and I was adopted by my mom, who's American, Italian, and I'm in the US for 30 years. And obviously I want to go back to Romania because that's where I'm from. But I'm going to school for software engineering. And it's really cool to meet everybody. But this is, you know, this needs to be like spread out social media. You got Snapchat, you got Instagram, you got LinkedIn. You know, there's other ways too. And now with TikTok being banned, it's just like, really, we need to see the big picture here. Banning TikTok is not going to stop, you know. And it was lovely to meet you, Oleksandra.
Thank you. Thank you, Marisa, so much. And thanks for your personal story, because all these circles of exclusion and violence need to be broken. And that is the message, I hope, the circle and the contribution. So, Oleksandra, I want to turn it back to you for any final thoughts. What gives you hope? Where do we go from here?
I know from my own experience that when you can't rely on the legal instrument, you can still rely on people. Because ordinary people do extraordinary things. And ordinary people in different countries of the world now are fighting for freedom and human dignity, sometimes in such unbelievable circumstances that their efforts may seem have no senses because they face with enormous opposing power. But the truth is that we have to continue our fight honestly. I will share to the end my own experience. It was Revolution of Dignity time when millions of Ukrainians stood up their voice against corrupt authoritarian government. And they peacefully demonstrated throughout the country just for a chance to build the country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating.
Right.
And all this period, the previous authoritarian regime in Ukraine tried to prosecute peaceful protesters. And we built a civil initiative which is called Euromaidan SOS to provide legal assistance to people throughout the country. We worked 24 hours a day. We united thousands of people. And every day, hundreds and hundreds of victims of illegal detention, beating, torture, people who were accused in fabricated criminal cases pass through our care. So, frankly speaking, we are faced against the whole state machine. They were against us. Paramilitary group Titushki cooperated with prosecutors. Prosecutors cooperated with court. The former president, government, majority of parliament, security service were against us. They won't even kill us to liquidate the peaceful protests physically. In these circumstances, it was so easy to say, but what we can do when the law is not exist? But because our volunteers and our lawyers continued their fight very honestly for each person, for each procedure's measures, suddenly we start to work not just on legal, we start to work on symbolical level, on the level where ideas, values, and senses are emerged. And the main idea which we created during the Revolution of Dignity was that there is no guarantee in our life. You can be persecuted, you can be beaten, you can be tortured, you can even be killed. But there are people who will fight for you, who will never left you alone, who in the worst scenario will take care about your family and your children. And this understanding that you are not alone helped people to overcome the fear and to continue the struggle. And we succeed. The authoritarian regime collapsed and our former president escaped to Russia. And now the new story started because when we got a chance for democratic transition, in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Because believe me, Putin is not afraid of NATO. He is afraid of idea of freedom.
Yeah.
Each dictator afraid of
That's
idea
it.
of freedom.
That's exactly. Well,
So I
go
will
ahead.
just finish one again that we get used to thinking through the categories of states and inter-states organization. But people are much more influential. People are much more important. Ordinary people doing right things can change the history.
As you are clearly doing every day. So I want to thank you, Oleksandra, for insights. I feel we have so many bumper sticker sentences from gender has no bravery, etc. So again, deep thanks to everything you've shared and certainly for inspiring us and sharing the global perspectives. I want to thank all of you for joining us and for participating. And just from just ending this, what this circle exemplifies is how we walk the freedom, how we share, how we might disagree, how we engage each other. But that is this international solidarity is frankly what, to be very honest, going back to my teacher and mentor, Judith Thompson, that saves lives. These kind of international recognition and seeing each other, even at the height of horror, is indeed doing extraordinary things. So I want to thank the circle. I want to thank Theo and Phoebe, and I want to turn over to you, Theo, for closing us off. Oleksandra, thanks. Спасибо.
Thank you, Oleksandra.
Thank
Beautiful.
you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Oleksandra. Thank you, Miki. Thank you to all who have been involved in this program. I want to thank all of you who asked questions. If we didn't get to your questions, I apologize for that. We could go on all day, I'm sure. I would like to, if I may, ask of Peter Yarrow, who is here with us today. Even if you can't sing, and many of you may know Peter from the folk trio, Peter, Paul, and Mary, who was involved in the civil rights movement. I wonder if you might, even if you can't sing, Peter, if you would even speak the words of Light One Candle or any of the many solidarity songs that you sang or that you continue to sing.
This is, it was in my heart to try to find a way to speak and sing now, because I was sitting here and I was so very moved, but I know that from my own history, there is yet another way to fight this fight. And it is through the cultural workers, which is what people of the sort of Paul and Mary, Alexandra, we sang at the March on Washington in 1963, when before Martin Luther King Jr., we sang. I mean, this has been our life. My life is all about the connection between the arts and using the arts to create a solidarity of spirit. So let me just do this for a moment, and then I'll say a few more words rather than talk about it. I want to share it. This is a song written by Bob Dylan that we sang then, and its value and its importance has not diminished over the years. How many roads must a man walk down before they call him a man? And how many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand? And how many times must the cannonballs fly before they're forever banned? The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. And now I'm going to ask you all to do something very bizarre. After I sing it one more time, unmute and sing along. We will all be out of sync. It'll be cacophonous, but it will be a physical, in the moment manifestation of our togetherness. So while I'm singing the chorus, again, unmute your microphone. Okay. The answer, my friend,
is
blowing
blowing
in the wind. The answer is blowing in the wind. Now, reach out your arms like this, and I'm touching you, Alexandra, with my arm. See, my hand is reaching for yours, right outside the picture. It makes you like that. And we just rock back and forth, and we sing together. The answer,
my friend,
My friend,
is
blowing
blowing
in
in
the
the wind.
wind.
the
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 answer
answer
is
is
blowing
blowing
in
in
the
the
wind.
wind.
Here's the second verse. How many years can a mountain exist before it is washed to the sea? A mountain of hatred, ignorance, prejudice. How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free? So we're all hearing these words together. And how many times can a man turn his head and pretend that he just doesn't see? Hands across. The answer,
My
Friend
friend
is
is
blowing
blowing
in
in the
the
wind.
wind.
the
The
answer
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 is
is
blowing
blowing
in the
in the
wind.
wind.
and how many times can a man look up before he can see the sky? The inability to see what is happening, inability to respond, to feel. How many ears must one man have before he can hear people cry. You note that this is told in the male gender because the males perpetrated this, they have to take responsibility. It's not how many women ears must one woman have before, because women hear people cry. Thank you. How many deaths will it take till it know that too many people have died? Put your arms, please, up, reach across, all the way over. The answer
Answer, my
My
friend,
friend
is
is
blowing
blowing
in
in
the
the
wind.
wind.
The
The
answer
answer
is
is
blowing
blowing
in the
in the
wind.
wind.
Oh, hug yourself. And that means I'm hugging you too. I'm
Thank you.
hugging you so
you.
hard.
Thank you very much.
You.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Unfortunately, I have to run. I'm
Alexandra,
so
thank
sorry.
you.
Alexandra.
We know you
Thank you
have to
very much
go.
for the brilliant ending. I will run with a huge energy and with a positive mood. Thank you.
And
My heart. Thank
and
you.
with love, love and
Thank you.
You're so
compassion.
welcome.
Thank you so
Compassion,
Thank you.
love, love.
And Peter, thank you so much for leading us in that. That was amazing, just amazing.
I wrote to everybody. I wrote to you.
I'd like to, I can end the formal program now, but as many of you know, people stay on to these, conversations and to chat and to just reflect on what they've heard. So I certainly will keep the Zoom open, but if you have to go, please, feel free. You don't have to stay on any longer, because we are at just about 11:30. But you're welcome to stay, and you can unmute yourself if you have something you want to add to the conversation. I think we all got a lot to process from that.
I have to excuse myself, but I want to see the recording thereafter because this is so essential and important for us to be doing so that we hear each other and hear these points of view. And Jerry and Nadine, I love you and thank you for what you are doing forever. And Miki, love you, my brother. And Emmanuel, unbelievable what the work that you do. Each and every one of you I know is there. Thank you. Please forgive me for having to run.
No problem. And we will send you the recording of this session.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you again.
Great.
So Theo, thank you, Peter, and thanks everybody. And Alexandra did tell us she would have to leave, but Theo, if you don't mind, I see the hand of my beloved sister Precious from Liberia.
Yes.
So Precious, I'm sorry I didn't see it before. I love you. Please go ahead.
Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Precious.
You're muted, Precious. Can you unmute?
Unmute. It looks like you might be on your phone. Well, while we wait to see if Precious can get her phone, herself unmuted, is there anybody else want to add anything?
Ellen has her hand up while Precious, I'll text you.
Yeah. Ellen.
Morning, everyone. And I just, like everybody, I'm still a little weepy. Thank you to Nadine and Jerry, my old neighbors from way back in the day, and everybody else who's here. As I've been thinking about this, I just have to preface this saying that I studied history at university, and I studied the Holocaust. I studied fascism, thinking that I was studying history, the past. Obviously, we can get beyond this. Obviously, these kinds of things will never happen again. And clearly, as we've done a lot of Holocaust denial and a lot of, I can't even believe I'm saying these words, return to fascism. And in some places, I acknowledge it never left. I'm just kind of wondering what we can do to educate children to know the difference between what is fascism, what is democracy, what is abuse, what is all of these kinds of things. Because I think that, you know, how the adults got caught up again in these kinds of things all throughout the world and all of these hotspots, it's been amazing to watch, like bizarrely amazing. And I'm just wondering how we can work with our children. And you know, one thing I do is we do food justice and food security, and you know, there's something really healing about being in the earth. So I just kind of want to put that out there about growing things with them. So those are just some of my thoughts, but clearly I'm curious what you all think and the speakers. And
Thank you, Ellen. Appreciate that thought. And I completely agree that, you know, this kind of educating of young people and are learning from them as well about the world that they are inheriting is so important. And I think there is a lot of education to be done on that difference between fascism and democracy, and what we can do as ordinary citizens of our states and our countries to prevent it.
Well, and before we turn to Precious and then Judith, I would say, Ellen, what, you know, and Judith and Nadine knows, my wife is from Guatemala, I'm from Bosnia, so we are raising the first American Muslim Catholic Mayan kids. And I often say, just live the life full of respect for human dignity and show it to your children. What it means to invite diversity, to invite difference, to respect it, because obviously, you know, imagine my poor mother literally in the middle of the war, I'm telling her, I married this little brown Mayan woman, and her family seeing this huge gringo coming out of nowhere. And yet for 30 some years, we have modeled with our children and their friends that there is a difference between those who are respectful, who value dignity. And so I sometimes think we tend to overcomplicate, and there's so much emphasis on philosophizing. But for me, when the head and the heart meet the hands and we keep doing the things we do, that's the best we can offer. And Earth, I love it. We plant coffee in Guatemala for that reason. Precious, and then Judith, and then sadly I also have to go. But Precious, I'm staying for you, my love.
Hi, thank you for having me, Miki, and I apologize for not being able to connect earlier. I switched from my computer to my phone, and I didn't know how to work it. But I'm in a vehicle, so if I sound a little muffled, please understand. I was touched and moved by by the speaker's story and her responses. And what came to my mind is, I know that the Liberian women, I'm from Liberia, and we do have a success story on how we brought peace back to Liberia. But I must say that the women from Ukraine caught the vision at an earlier stage than we did, because we say in Liberia, no longer men in the front and the women in the back. Together we will work hand in hand and side by side. But to see that the women from Ukraine are now fighting, they got up, they stopped, they wanted to avoid their kids, their husbands being raped, their mothers being raped, and they joined the army, they joined the military willingly. Unlike the Liberian women, we didn't have that vision. Women were forced into the war, women were raped, women, you know, they had to go for survival. So it wasn't at our will. We did it because we wanted to. We had to protect our husbands and go and send food for them. And in the process of doing that, women, you know, some of them were captured as prisoners of war, and they were used to cook and carry, you know, stuff for for the military, unlike, I mean, for the rebels, unlike the Ukrainian women, you know, after they saw what was happening to them, it pleases me that they're joining the army, and that's just contrary to what happened to us in Liberia, and that shows strength, you know, and I just couldn't help but to, yeah, I wish I had the opportunity to just tell her how amazing, you know, they are, and just to give her more power and all the support we can as women. Thank you. And thanks, Miki.
Thank you, Precious. I will be sure to send your message to Oleksandra of support and solidarity.